The Forbidden's vessel commander Zektar stood frozen on the bridge of his exploration vessel, all four of his eyes fixed on the massive structure floating in the void ahead. In his 20 cycles of service with the Galactic Coalition, he had never seen anything quite like it. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of his own vessel, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly silver that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. "Commander," his navigation officer called out her, tentacles trembling with excitement. "The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases. This vessel is generating power levels that should be impossible." Zektar's mandibles clicked together nervously. 3 days ago, their deep space sensors had detected this anomaly in the neutral zone, a region of space that no known civilization had ever claimed. The ship appeared to be drifting, showing no signs of active propulsion, yet it maintained a perfect orbital position around a small asteroid. "Any response to our communications?" Zektar asked. "None, sir. We've tried every known language protocol, even mathematical sequences. The ship remains silent." The bridge fell quiet except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Zektar studied the mysterious vessel through the main view screen. Its design was unlike anything in Coalition records. The hull curved in impossible ways, featuring sections that seemed to fold in on themselves. Strange symbols flickered along, its surface appearing and disappearing like distant stars. "Shall we attempt boarding, Commander?" asked his first officer, a tall, crystalline being whose voice chimed like wind through crystal caves. Before Zektar could respond, the ship suddenly came alive. Lights raced along its hull in complex patterns, and a low harmonic tone filled their bridge, despite the vacuum of space between them. "It's scanning us," the sensor operator reported, her voice tight with concern. "The scan is incredibly detailed, going beyond just our ship. It's analyzing our biological signatures, our neural patterns, even our genetic structures." The scanning continued for several long minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the activity stopped. The mysterious ship returned to its previous dormant state, floating silently in space. What just happened? Zektar demanded. His science officer, a slug-like being with multiple eye stalks, consulted his instruments. "The ship appears to have evaluated us and ... found us lacking, sir. It's completely powered down again." Over the next several hours, Zektar's crew attempted various approaches. Each time they drew near enough to attempt boarding, the same pattern repeated. The ship would activate, scan them thoroughly, then shut down completely. Their shuttlecraft were gently but firmly pushed away by some kind of energy field whenever they tried to dock. News of the discovery spread quickly through Coalition space. Within a week, representatives from a dozen different species had arrived to examine the mysterious vessel. The Zephyrians came first, their sleek ships bristling with the most advanced scanning equipment in the galaxy. They were followed by the methodical Gornaks, who approached the problem with mathematical precision. Each species brought their own unique approach. The telepathic Mindari attempted to establish mental contact with whatever intelligence might be controlling the ship. The energy-based Luxans tried to interface directly with the vessel's power systems. The ancient Keepers, oldest of all Coalition species, brought historical records spanning millions of years, hoping to identify the ship's origin. Every attempt ended the same way. The ship would scan the approaching aliens, then reject them completely. Some were simply pushed away. Others found their ships temporarily disabled, forcing them to retreat. A few reported strange sensations during the scanning process, as if something vast and intelligent was examining not just their technology, but their very souls. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived at the site 3 weeks after the initial discovery. Her transport ship, a modest Coalition research vessel, seemed tiny compared to the massive military and exploration ships that had gathered around the mysterious artifact. Sarah pressed her face against the viewport, studying the ship with the trained eye of a xenorchaeologist. Unlike the other researchers who had come before her, Sarah wasn't primarily interested in the ship's technology or potential military applications. She was fascinated by what the vessel might tell them about the civilization that had built it. The flowing design, the organic curves, the way the hull seemed to pulse with barely contained energy, all of it spoke to her of a species that viewed technology not as mere tools, but as living extensions of themselves. "Dr. Chun," Captain Morrison said, joining her at the viewport, "I've been monitoring the communications between the other research teams. None of them made any progress. The ship rejects every boarding attempt." Sarah nodded, still studying. "A mysterious vessel. What's interesting is that it doesn't destroy them. It could easily do so, given the power levels we're detecting. Instead, it simply pushes them away, as if it's looking for something specific." "The Coalition Council is getting impatient," Morrison continued. "There's talk of using force to breach the hull." "That would be a mistake," Sarah said firmly. "This ship is choosing to reject visitors. If we force our way inside, we might destroy whatever we're trying to learn from it." Captain Morrison was quiet for a moment. "The Council specifically requested you for this mission, Dr. Chun. Your work on the precursor ruins on Kepler 442 made quite an impression. They think if anyone can figure out this puzzle, it's you." Sarah smiled grimly. Her reputation had been built on understanding alien mindsets, on looking beyond the obvious technological aspects of ancient artifacts to understand the beings who had created them. Every species approached problems differently, and the key to understanding their technology was understanding how they thought. "I'd like to approach the ship alone," she said. Morrison frowned. The other teams had full crews and military escorts. "You want to go out there in a single-person shuttle? The ship has been rejecting groups. Maybe it's looking for something different. Maybe it wants to deal with individuals, not committees." After several hours of debate with Coalition Command, Sarah received permission for her attempt. She climbed into a small research shuttle, its hull equipped with the most advanced sensors available. Unlike the military vessels that had made previous attempts, her shuttle carried no weapons, no military markings. It was purely a scientific vessel, designed for exploration and discovery rather than conquest. As Sarah's shuttle approached the mysterious ship, she felt a familiar tingle of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was what she lived for, the moment of first contact with something completely unknown. She had spent her career studying the remnants of long-dead civilizations, but this ship was clearly still active, still functional after what must have been centuries or millennia drifting in space. The ship began its scanning sequence as soon as she drew close. Sarah felt the energy wash over her shuttle, penetrating every system, every component. But unlike the reports from other teams, the scan seemed to linger on her biological readings. She could almost feel an intelligence probing not just her genetics, but something deeper. "This is Dr. Chun to Coalition Command," she reported over the comm. "The ship is scanning me, but the pattern is different from what others have reported. It's taking much longer, and the scan seems more personal." The scanning continued for nearly 10 minutes, far longer than any previous attempt. Sarah waited, patiently maintaining her position relative to the ship. She spoke softly to herself, a habit she'd developed during years of solitary research. "What are you looking for?" she murmured, watching the lights dance across the alien hull. "What makes one visitor acceptable and another not?" Suddenly, the ship's entire structure seemed to shift. The flowing hull patterns rearranged themselves, creating what looked like a docking port, exactly the right size for Sarah's shuttle. Lights pulsed in a clear invitation pattern, and Sarah felt her heart race with excitement. "Coalition Command, are you seeing this? The ship is inviting me to dock. We see it, Dr. Chun. Proceed with extreme caution. Sarah guided her shuttle toward the newly formed docking port. As she made contact, she felt a gentle magnetic field take hold of her vessel, drawing it into a perfect seal with the alien ship. The sensation was remarkably smooth, as if the ship had been designed specifically for her shuttle. Environmental sensors showed that the docking area was pressurizing with a breathable atmosphere. The composition was almost identical to Earth. Normal, though Sarah couldn't imagine how the ship could have known that. She ran quick scans of the air. No toxins, no harmful microorganisms, no radiation. Sarah suited up in her environmental gear anyway. Years of xenoarchaeological fieldwork had taught her never to take unnecessary risks, no matter how safe things appeared. She sealed her helmet and activated her suit's recording systems. Whatever she was about to discover, she wanted it fully documented. The airlock cycled open, revealing a corridor unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of the same flowing silver material as the ship's hull, but here the patterns were more complex, more purposeful. Lights moved along the walls in gentle waves, leading deeper into the ship like a pathway of stars. As Sarah stepped into the corridor, she felt the ship respond to her presence. The lights grew brighter, and she could hear a soft harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through the deck plating. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it felt welcoming, like a greeting from an old friend. "This is incredible," she whispered, her voice recorded by her suit's systems. The ship is clearly responding to human presence in a way it didn't respond to other species. The question is why? She followed the lighted pathway deeper into the ship, her sensors recording everything. The architecture was organic, flowing, with no sharp corners or harsh angles. Doorways opened automatically as she approached them, revealing chambers filled with technology that defied her understanding. Crystal formations that pulsed with energy, floating spheres that orbited each other in complex patterns, walls covered with symbols that shifted and changed as she watched. Eventually, the pathway led her to what she assumed was the ship's central command area. The chamber was vast, with a domed ceiling that displayed what looked like a real-time view of the surrounding space. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, supporting a single glowing crystal. As Sarah approached the crystal, it began to pulse more rapidly. The harmonic tone she'd been hearing grew stronger, more complex, almost like music. She reached out tentatively and touched the crystal's surface. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Images flooded her mind, not painful, but intensely vivid. She saw the ship's builders, a species that had transcended physical form centuries ago. She understood that the ship was not just a vessel, but a test, a way for the ancient builders to find a worthy successor to their knowledge. Every species that had approached the ship had been evaluated based on their intentions, their nature, their fundamental approach to the unknown. And every species had failed because they had approached with thoughts of conquest, of acquisition, of using the ship's power for their own purposes. But humans were different. Sarah's mind, her species' mind, approached the unknown with curiosity, rather than greed, with wonder rather than fear, with a desire to understand rather than to possess. The ship had been waiting for someone like her, someone like humanity. As the visions faded, Sarah found herself facing a choice that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of human civilization. The ancient builders had left behind more than just a ship. They had left behind a test that could unlock the greatest secrets of the universe. But first, she would have to prove that humanity was truly worthy of such trust. Asterisk, the test of worth. The crystal's glow intensified as Sarah maintained contact with its surface. The visions that had initially overwhelmed her now settled into a clearer pattern, like a vast library of knowledge being carefully organized for her understanding. She could see the entire history of the ship's builders, a species that had called themselves the Architects. Millions of years ago, the Architects had faced the same crossroads that now confronted the younger races of the galaxy. They had achieved incredible technological advancement, but had realized that power without wisdom led only to destruction. Rather than simply disappearing into transcendence, they had chosen to leave behind a test, a way to determine which of the galaxies emerging species might be worthy of their legacy. The ship, which the Architects had named Eternal Vigil, was both guardian and teacher. For millennia, it had wandered the galaxy, observing, evaluating, waiting for a species that possessed not just intelligence or technological capability, but something far more rare, genuine wisdom. Sarah understood now why every other species had been rejected. The Zephyrians had approached with thoughts of military advantage. The Gornax had seen only a puzzle to be solved for academic glory. The Mindari had attempted to dominate the ship's consciousness rather than communicate with it. Each species had revealed their fundamental nature through their approach to the unknown, and each had been found wanting, but humans had approached differently. Sarah's own thoughts as she had entered the ship had been focused on understanding, on learning, on preserving whatever knowledge the ship contained for the benefit of all. The Architects had been waiting for someone who viewed discovery not as conquest, but as responsibility. The crystal pulsed again, and new information flowed into Sarah's consciousness. The ship contained the accumulated knowledge of the Architects, technology that could revolutionize energy production, faster than light travel, even the manipulation of matter at the quantum level. But more than that, it contained their philosophical and ethical frameworks, their understanding of how such power should be used. A new presence made itself known in Sarah's mind, gentle but vast. The ship's artificial intelligence, a creation of the Architects that had maintained its vigil for millions of years. Welcome, child of humanity. The presence communicated, not through words, but through direct transmission of meaning. I am the keeper of the vigil. I have waited so long for someone like you. Sarah found she could respond in kind, her thoughts translated into the same pure communication. Why us? Why humans? We're not the oldest species, not the most technologically advanced. What makes us different? Your species possesses something that has become rare in the galaxy, the Keeper replied. When faced with the unknown, you do not immediately seek to control or exploit it. You ask questions. You seek to understand. You consider the consequences of your actions, not just for yourselves, but for others. Images flowed through Sarah's mind, showing her the Keeper's observations of humanity over the centuries. The Architect's ship had been watching human civilization develop, studying their choices, their mistakes, their growth. They had seen humans make terrible errors, but also seen them learn from those errors, adapt, and develop ethical frameworks that govern their use of new technologies. Your species has something the Architects called constructive curiosity, the Keeper continued. You explore not to dominate, but to understand. You discover not to hoard, but to share. This is why you were chosen. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What exactly are you asking of us? The chamber around her began to change. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast interior of the ship. Sarah could see chambers filled with Architect technology, knowledge cores containing the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization, and manufacturing facilities that could produce wonders beyond imagination. The Architects left a choice for whoever proved worthy, the Keeper explained. You can accept their legacy, gaining access to all their knowledge and technology. But with that acceptance comes responsibility. You would become the galaxy's guardians, tasked with guiding other species toward wisdom rather than merely power. And if we refuse? Then the ship will continue its vigil, waiting for another species to prove worthy. The knowledge will remain sealed, and the galaxy will continue to develop at its own pace. Sarah considered this carefully. The technology contained within the ship could solve many of humanity's problems, could advance their civilization by thousands of years. But it would also fundamentally change what it meant to be human. More importantly, it would place humanity in a position of enormous power over other species. "Can I see what acceptance would mean?" she asked. The keeper granted her request, and Sarah's consciousness expanded to encompass a vision of the future. She saw humanity taking on the role of the architects, using their advanced technology not for conquest, but for guidance. Human teachers working with alien species, helping them overcome the same challenges that had once threatened to destroy humanity itself. She saw the galaxy transformed, not through domination, but through cooperation and shared wisdom. But she also saw the darker possibilities. The temptation to use such power for personal gain, the risk of becoming the very thing the architects had tried to prevent. The weight of making decisions that would affect entire civilizations, the burden of knowing that every choice could have consequences across millennia. Your species has already begun to demonstrate the wisdom the architects sought, the keeper observed. Even now, as you face this choice, you think not of what humanity might gain, but of what humanity might become. This is precisely why you were chosen. Sarah made her decision, but it wasn't the one the keeper had expected. "I can't accept this responsibility on behalf of all humanity," she said firmly. "This choice is too important for one person to make. The architects left this test for a reason. If humanity is truly worthy, then all of humanity should be part of this decision." The keeper's presence seemed to pause, processing this unexpected response. "In all the millennia I have waited, no one has ever refused to accept the architect's legacy on the grounds that the choice was too important for them to make alone. This is unprecedented." "Then maybe that's exactly why we're the right choice," Sarah replied. "I want to bring representatives from human civilization to meet with you. I want them to understand what this choice means, not just for us, but for every species in the galaxy. If we're going to accept this responsibility, we need to do it with the full knowledge and consent of our people." The chamber fell silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the keeper's presence seemed to grow warmer, more approving. "The architects would have been pleased," the keeper finally said. "Your response demonstrates exactly the kind of wisdom they hope to find." "Very well. I will wait while you consult with your people. But know this, the choice, once made, cannot be undone. If humanity accepts the architect's legacy, you will be bound to it for as long as your species exists." Sarah nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. "How long can you wait?" "I have waited millions of years." "Already," the keeper replied with what might have been amusement. "A few more years will not matter." The crystal under Sarah's hand pulsed one final time, and she felt her connection to the ship's consciousness gently severed. The chamber returned to its normal appearance, but Sarah could see it differently now. Every surface, every device, every flowing line of the ship's architecture represented the accumulated wisdom of a species that had chosen transcendence over domination. As she made her way back through the ship's corridors, Sarah found herself thinking about the enormous responsibility that had been offered to humanity. The architect's technology could solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. But more than that, it could provide a framework for wisdom, a way to ensure that technological advancement was balanced with ethical development. She thought about the other species that had been rejected by the ship. They weren't evil or malicious, just limited by their own perspectives. The Zephyrians saw technology as a tool for military advantage because their species had evolved in a hostile environment where survival depended on strength. The Gornaks approached every problem as a mathematical puzzle because their analytical minds couldn't comprehend the emotional and ethical dimensions of complex decisions. But humans had developed differently. Their species had faced countless challenges, made countless mistakes, and learned from each one. They had developed philosophy alongside technology, ethics alongside engineering. They had learned to question not just how to do something, but whether it should be done at all. When Sarah finally returned to her shuttle, she found dozens of messages waiting from Coalition Command. The other research teams had been monitoring her mission, and her extended absence had caused considerable concern. But as she began to compose her report, Sarah realized that the real work was just beginning. Convincing the Coalition to allow humanity to make this choice would be difficult enough. But convincing humanity itself to accept such an enormous responsibility would be even harder. She would need to find a way to explain the magnitude of what the architects had offered and the consequences of accepting or refusing their legacy. As her shuttle undocked from the Eternal Vigil, Sarah took one last look at the magnificent ship. It had returned to its dormant state, but she knew it was waiting patiently for humanity's answer. The Keeper had waited millions of years for this moment, and it would wait as long as necessary for the right decision to be made. The journey back to Coalition space gave Sarah time to think about how to present this choice to humanity. It wasn't just about gaining access to incredible technology. It was about accepting the responsibility to guide other species toward wisdom, to prevent the mistakes that could destroy civilizations, and to ensure that the galaxy's future was built on cooperation rather than conquest. She thought about the architects who had faced this same choice millions of years ago. They had chosen to transcend their physical existence rather than risk becoming corrupted by their own power. But they had also chosen to leave behind a way for other species, to learn from their example, to perhaps succeed where they had felt they might fail. The test had never been about technological capability or military might. It had been about wisdom, about the ability to see beyond immediate needs and desires, to consider the long-term consequences of one's actions. Every species that had approached the Eternal Vigil had failed this test because they had approached it with the wrong mindset. But humans had approached it with curiosity, with respect, with a genuine desire to understand rather than to possess. And that, Sarah realized, was exactly what the galaxy needed. Not another dominant species, but a species willing to serve as guardians and teachers, helping others find their own path to wisdom. As Earth came into view, Sarah began preparing her report. She would need to be careful, diplomatic, but also completely honest about what the architects were offering. The choice would ultimately belong to all of humanity, but she would make sure they understood exactly what they were choosing between. The Eternal Vigil continued its patient orbit around the small asteroid, waiting for humanity's answer. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, the transcended consciousness of the architects watched with interest, wondering if their long experiment in finding wisdom among the stars had finally succeeded.